Hello everybody and welcome to my new session. I am Nandakishore. In my previous video, I had discussed about the chapter Japan and Brazil Through a Traveler's Eye written by George Mikes. And in today's session, I am going to discuss about the chapter I believe that books will never disappear. So before I move on, you need to know few things. So things you should know is that this chapter is an excerpt taken from 24 conversations with Borges interview by Roberto Alifano. So this is not the chapter written entirely. It is a piece of information or it is a piece of chapter which is taken from a lengthy conversation. And second thing, George Luis Borges is an Argentine short story writer, essayist, poet and a translator. So this chapter is basically in the form of an interview where Roberto Alifano interviews George Luis Borges. So this is in the form of an interview, keep that in mind. And Roberto Alifano is the interviewer and he is the interviewee, where it is in the question and answer form. In this chapter, what are they discussing? They are discussing about, in this chapter Borges talks about his family, on his blindness, books, poetry, metaphors and literature. So let us start with the chapter. The very first question Roberto Alifano asks George Luis Borges is about his first reading in his life. So the answer from Borges is that he had read Grimm's fairy tales from his father's library. Borges' father had a library and he had a huge volumes of books in the library. So he says when he was young, he remembers reading Grimm's fairy tales. So if you don't know who is Grimm, Grimm is like there are two brothers and they compose a lot of fairy tales. They are from Germany and they had composed a lot of fairy tales where the young kids read. So he says that he remembers reading it from his father's library. He felt that the volumes of books were so huge that he gained a lot of knowledge, a lot of comprehensive knowledge of various subjects. He just didn't read the fairy tales. He just didn't read the books which are read by other kids. He also gained a lot of knowledge apart from gaining the moral stories. So the next question from Alifano is, can we talk about your mother, Donna Leonor? So Donna Leonor was Borges' mother, and Borges in deep pain explains about his mother. And why is he in deep pain? Because like other students, like other people, like other children, even Borges took his mother for granted. He says, I took my mother for granted just the way we take the sun, the moon and the seasons. If you don't know what it is, we know that sun rises every day and it sets, and when it sets we are sure that it is going to rise again and it is going to do its duty without anybody's consent, and nobody is worried about whether the sun is going to rise tomorrow. We know it that sun is going to do its duty the way the moon, the seasons are going to do it theirs. And he compares his mother to the sun, the moon and the seasons because she is doing her duty the way she has to, the way she does. And Borges says that I took her for granted. No special attention was given to his mother. And he not just says that, he also says she was kind, she was intellectual, she was a modest woman one can ever have. He is in deep pain when he answers this question. He says not just that, just like me, any other people in the world, if they are taking their mothers for granted, they will regret for sure once she passes away. She has to die, right? once she is no longer with their kids, or once the mothers are not with their kids, the kids would realize what they missed in their lives, just the way Borges did. So don't ever neglect people around you in your lives. They mean a lot to you at times. So as the conversation is going on, ALIFANO asks, so what is your opinion about blindness? And if you don't know why ALIFANO is asking about blindness, now when this interview was going on, Louis Borges was 83 years old and he was almost moving towards the dark life because he was getting blind. He was losing his eyesight. And when this question was asked, Borges says that now it is a way of life. Imagine all of a sudden, let it not happen, I am not wishing that it should happen, but if it happens, all of a sudden you get up tomorrow morning and you have realized that you have lost your eyesight, what would be your reaction? How would you react? I'm sure you feel that the world has ended. You cannot see no colorful life from now on. That's the way even Borges felt. But are you going to feel the same feeling again and again, over and over, days after days? No, because you have to get used to it the way Borges did. So Borges now says it is a way of life. He admits that he had reached completely unknown dark world, and what was the level of difficulty he faced during his initial days. Of course, if a man loses, or if anybody loses the eyesight, it will be very disastrous. It's a tragedy, yes, but they have to get used to it. They have to move on in their lives. He calls it a resource, that all things have been given to us for a purpose. He says it is a resource. Very important. He says it is a resource. Can you consider it, Borges calling his blindness as a resource? Can you accept his words? If you did, well and good. Now, why did he call the blindness was a resource? Imagine we are stuck in the life of Corona. Yes, people have led their lives in luxury. People might have not even bothered of waving their hands to those who were working under them, and all of a sudden a person dies tomorrow morning. And would you think a person who led his life in a luxurious way will be living his life after that in a luxurious way? No, he didn't. He cannot. He cannot lead. Forget about afterlife, after death. Let us come back to the death situation here. Now, do you think those people who were hired by him would come and touch him? They don't. Now, do you think that you want to see this situation? If you observe the televisions, if you watch the news, the media every day, there are a lot of people dying around the world, and they are just dumped like a gunny bag inside the burial ground. They are not even touched. Does it give you a good pleasure to watch this? You might think, instead of looking at this, let me just turn off my TV. That's why he says it is a resource. He can only hear right now. He can just use his imagination and imagine what would be the condition. But he has no eyesight to look at this horrible situation of a mankind. He says, that is why he says, resource, that all things have been given to us for a purpose. And not just the blindness, he says, he brings in the examples to enhance his explanation. So what does he mean with the word resource? He says, humiliations, these are very important in present scenario. These young generation, they cannot tolerate humiliation. You tell them something, they take it in a wrong way. Parents, they don't have any rights to scold their children. You tell them not to use cell phone, they bounce back at you. You tell them you behave well, you dress up well, you learn some mannerism, they will bounce back and tell you, you need not, you don't have any rights to teach me. If they are in this situation, it's well and good. Few people will move further and they commit suicide. They cannot tolerate humiliation. And he says, this is a resource. Humiliation is a resource. Our misfortunes, our embarrassments are given to us as raw materials. So these, he says, raw materials. These are raw materials. So the one who has guts in himself, one who can achieve, or one who dreams, or one who dare tries something new, will make use of all these raw materials and he can achieve something, so that we may shape our art. Everybody is born with talent. No kid or nobody is dull or dumb or idiotic or mediocre child. No, each child is unique in its own way. Only thing we have to do is we need to find a key and unlock our talents and make use of all the resources which are available at our feet. One can achieve and accomplish if he is capable of turning these raw materials into a fine product. As I told, if you are capable of finding those raw materials, even if you don't have a raw material, you build your own raw material. There is a proverb which says, if opportunity doesn't knock at your door, build a door. You need to create your own way. The world is not so ideal for those who sit like a couch potato and eat or dream that I'm going to achieve something in future. A dreamer is one who just sits and dreams. An achiever is one who chases those dreams and achieves it. So think about it. So these are the beautiful answers given by Borges. And next he says, when Alifano is asking questions upon questions to Borges, he just brings in a reference of Library of Alexandria. He had a dream. He says that he had a dream that the books went under fire. So he says it could be the dream. He had a bad dream. So what is the dream all about? So this is the Library of Alexandria. It is in Egypt. Alexandria is a place in Egypt, and this is considered one of the oldest and largest libraries ever existed in the world. And it was set in the flames. So it was completely burnt down to ashes. And as a matter of fact, if you didn't know who burned this library, it was Julius Caesar. So let us not deviate from the topic. Coming back to this, he says he is interpreting his dream, the dream that the books were in flames. So he says, Borges says that it might be the dream of the Library of Alexandria going into flames. Now, Borges brings in a reference that he is 83. He is 83 years old when the interview took place. And Alifano is talking about the theme of book and along with the interpretation of dream of Borges. So Borges happily says that he still buys books at the age of 83. You might be wondering that, sir, you told that Borges was blind. He was almost losing his eyesight. Then why is he buying books? The question is, why is he buying books? Because it gives him a comfort. He wants to feel himself that he has not lost his eyesight. He might have lost his vision, but not his imagination. He cannot read, accepted, but he can feel. It gives him the close bondage. So that is the sort of a bondage Borges has with the books. Let me just give you a simple example. Just recall your childhood life and think of how many took a new textbook or notebook, opened it and smelled the textbook or notebook. It felt good, right? Didn't it? It really felt good for me. I enjoyed it. Though I was not a bright kid, I enjoyed buying books Though I didn't write even a single word, I enjoyed buying books. All I did was, or all we did maybe, was to buy a new book, wrap it neatly and put it inside the bag. Whether we opened it, whether we bought it for use, it didn't matter. But we had a sort of a bondage. If you still do have a bondage, that sort of a bondage with books, then definitely you're not missing out a crucial part of your life. It is very important and one of the memorable, cherished part of your lives. So don't ever forget the time you spent with the books. He says, in a book, there can be full of errors and one can reject author's opinion, but the book always retains something sacred, something mortal, something magical, which brings happiness. I absolutely agree with this point. I have read books. I don't say I have read all the books in the world, but of all the books I have read, let us say 10 to 15% of the books I was not so satisfied. Why was that? Because the author himself was not clear about his ideas. I am not saying all the writers or all the authors are good or bad. I am saying there are exceptionally very well written books and outstanding authors, and there could be also average books. I don't want to say bad books, I would say average books. So he says there could be errors in it. Of course, books will have errors. And of all the books you read, even if you don't get anything, even if you want to reject the author's opinion or poet's opinion, you learn something out of it. Be it an average book, be it an extraordinary book, you definitely gain something. What is it something? It could be the lesson of criticizing, it could be the skill of analyzing. You gain something for sure. That is what Borges is trying to explain here. He says something sacred. It depends on which book you read. And he says of all the books you read, you definitely get happiness. Borges also tries to interpret a dream of the burning of great library. As I told you, this is the great library of Alexandria. It goes in flame and this was burnt down by Julius Caesar. And next thing, when asked about writing a book about the history of books, now there are books. Just go back to your childhood. You ask your parents, you ask your grandparents, you ask their next generation if you could. If they had recorded, how did they record it? There are ages together. There are centuries together. How did they record all these things? Now, the Library of Alexandria existed during 2nd century BC. Could you imagine it? So, we are talking about the centuries before incident. How did we get to know? Because it has been recorded somewhere. Where is that somewhere? It is books. It is a book. So, what is a written piece? Any written piece? Yes, compiled together, we call it book. Now, when asked about writing a book about the history of books, so when did book origin? Find out. When was the first origin of book? He says, did you just think of writing the history of books, origin of the history of books? He says, don't think, Borges answers, don't think that I am not given a try of writing about the history of books. I have given. In fact, Borges mentions about the acceptance of this task by quoting Sprengler. Sprengler is a German historian and he says, German writer Sprengler's Decline of the West. In this work, the Sprengler has written the work Decline of the West. This idea of writing a book on history of books is mentioned in this essay, in this book, in this work. And he also quotes George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw is an American writer. So he says about the book, every book worth being reread has been written by spirits. He says every book worth being reread. You read it once, you read it twice, you read it thrice, you read it as many times as you want until you feel satisfied. And he says if the book has given the taste in your life, it is considered that it has been written by spirits. He says spirits, not by a normal human being, an extraordinary, outstanding spirits, an extraordinary soul, effort which is appreciated to explain the nature of the book or piece of literature. So that's how the book should be when somebody writes a book. Now we are coming to the main point. There is a question guaranteed in your final exam on this topic. Can you define poetry? When ALIFANO asks, can you define what is poetry? Borges beautifully explains that poetry cannot be explained without oversimplifying it. Poetry could be a few lines, poem, few lines expressed by a poet. A chapter could be pages together. But do you know that poetry has more meaning? Poetry consumes more time while explaining? Yes, it does. Anything, right from the beginning, right from the title, including punctuation marks, capital letters, it could be anything. From the beginning point till the end, poetry is a beautiful piece of literature. And it cannot be explained without oversimplifying it. So Borges says that I believe that poetry is something so intimate. Yes, few people or few students, they have a habit of writing. It could be just 2 lines. It could be just 4 lines, or let's say it could be about 100 lines. If they have the habit of writing poetry out of their own experiences, out of their own feelings, it is felt as intimate. So essential that it cannot be defined without oversimplifying it. As I told, it cannot be defined. It is very difficult to understand without oversimplifying it. Poetry is the aesthetic act, extraordinary act. When a poet has created something and he fails to make the reader understand, the entire process of creation is a futile attempt. That is what I just told you. If a writer has no clear intentions of reaching the reader, then his work has failed. Likewise, if the poet is not clear about his ideas, his feelings, his expressions, and if the poets are not so clear about anything they write, then their attempt of writing or creation is futile. It's a failure attempt. If the readers cannot understand even a single line or a single word what a poet has written, then there is no point in writing at all. It is the poetic act that takes place when the poet writes it and the reader reads it. It is a poetic act. He just doesn't write it and readers, they don't read it. There is a communication between one and the other. Poetry is a magical, mysterious event. Absolutely marvelous answer. Ultimately, poetry or the poet should be able to reach the reader's mind and heart. There are lots of literature, books, poetry, and even any piece of information written or recorded have influenced many people. Yes, those who have a habit of reading, they get influenced. It might be enlightenment as well. Further, to describe the art of using precise words in poetry now, it's not just how you write a poem. It's not just anything you write becomes a poem. It's not just anything you scribble turns out to be a literary piece. No. You should have the caliber. You should learn or develop the caliber to invent a new word, to link it. There should be a spontaneity. William Wordsworth says that poetry is a spontaneous action. William Wordsworth is a well-known poet and he says it is a spontaneous action. And Borges says that using precise words in poetry, he quotes Emily Dickinson. And in her work, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies. One of the beautiful lines you can ever describe and elaborate and write pages together. It could be just a line, but you can write an essay on this. Let me just explain. This quiet dust. So what is this quiet dust? You walk on the footpath, just walk onto the road, you see a lot of dust there. Or it could be anywhere in the world. Dust. She is saying quiet dust. Dust itself is dead. And she is giving life to it. Quiet. And what do we turn into after we die? Once we are buried underground, we turn into dust. That's exactly what she meant, Emily Dickinson. Was gentlemen, observe this, was gentlemen and ladies. Why is she calling it and why is this line so prominent? He explains how the inclusion of two words, gentlemen and ladies, in the place of men and women. She could have used men and women. This quiet dust was men and women. Does it make any sense? But she uses gentlemen. She prefers using gentlemen and ladies, giving highest respect to a human being. Instead of that, instead of these men and women, she could have used these quiet dust is just a mankind as a whole. She could have compared it in general to a mankind. But she has particularly mentioned gentlemen and ladies. So that's how she addresses the dust. So that's how the powerful a poem could be. Now about metaphors. ALIFANO further moves and asks, what about metaphors? You should know what is a metaphor. If you have heard of simile, metaphor, so these are figures of speech in English. So what is a metaphor? Comparing two things without using as or like. It is just a direct comparison between two things. Let me just explain in brief. So Borges says they are expressed differently and why they are very important and an integral part of literature. According to Borges, there are 5 essential metaphors. 1 mark question. There are 5 essential metaphors. So these are time and a river, life and dreams, death and sleep, stars and eyes, flowers and women. He says metaphors, they are integral part of literature. Let me just give you an example for metaphor. You are shining like a sun. This is a simile. You are shining like a sun. You are burning like a fire. So I am using like here. So this is a simile. We are comparing two things. You is a human being or it could be any living thing. We are comparing two things using like or as. So that is simile. So what is a metaphor? You are a sun. You are a flower. Let us say you are a flower. You are a rose. Yes, we are directly comparing two things without using like or as. So that is a metaphor. So that's why he says, so these are the 5 essential metaphors which exist in literature, and it is the poet's duty or it is the writer's duty to find more metaphors in order to make the poetry very beautiful or to gain weightage to the poetry. It is the job or the duty of an author or a poet to come up with the metaphor. Even though it exists, he has to find it or he has to come up with more metaphors. So one last thing that ALIFANO asks is that, so what is your opinion about disappearance of book? So Borges, he rejects and he disapproves the idea of disappearance of book. When ALIFANO asks your opinion about disappearance of books, Borges says that it is not going to disappear. If books disappear, so will the mankind. Borges is objectional about disappearance of books in near future. He says in near future. Near future could be 100 years, 200 years, or maybe even 1000 years. I know in today's era, we are so adopted ourselves to technology. Instead of books, we are using electronic gadgets. We are using iPad, right? We are using cell phones. We are using computers. We are using laptops. But can all these gadgets, electronic gadgets, replace a book? I don't think so. It cannot. But I agree it is a substitute for a book, but it cannot replace. Substitute, it cannot replace. It cannot eradicate book. He strongly believed that modern developments in communications cannot replace books. So why is that? His logical argument is that the other scientific inventions of man are just an extension of the physical body, like the telephone, an extension of our voice. Agreed? Telephone is an extension of our voice. Telescope and microscope, extension of our sight or vision. Yes? Sword and plow, the extension of our hands. But it is only the book which is the extension of imagination and memory, both abstract concepts which are not dependent on any external object. These two lines are very important. He says the book which is the extension of imagination and memory. He says, can you just invent something to store our imagination, to react to our imagination, to think like us? There are robots. There is an artificial intelligence which has come up and gained popularity, but can it react the way we humans do? Never. He says that book is an extension of imagination and memory, both abstract concept. What is an abstract? Which you cannot see. Abstract is an idea or a concept which you cannot see but only feel it. Abstract. For an example, pain. You cannot see pain but you can sense it. Love. You cannot see love but you can feel it. Concepts which are not dependent on any external object are beautifully answered for the question. External object. He says that book is the most astounding of many human inventions. He says of all the inventions, book is one of the extraordinary inventions that human being has ever come up with. So at the last he asks about literature. Any idea that is literature a dream? Do you have any idea, or do you believe, ALIFANO is asking Borges now, do you believe that literature is a dream? Borges says yes. Literature is a dream, a controlled dream. He says literature is a dream. So what is this literature? I'm talking about literature. What is literature now? Now, can any written piece becomes literature? Now, literature has certain criteria. So literature is something that talks about mankind. It could be about any recorded piece, about science, about mankind, about society, about history. It has its own boundary. It's just that you cannot call any written piece as literature. He says, yes, literature is a dream, a controlled dream. Our past is a sequence of dreams. He says our past. there is a lot of history behind. So how do we know about our history? It's because we have recorded it. We have recorded in the books. So where did we record it? We have recorded in the book. Maybe in future, in near future, in next generation, in coming forth generation, they might record everything in an hard disk, or it could be artificial intelligence, right? But what has happened till now, we have recorded everything in book. So books are supposed to be the greatest memories of all centuries. Definitely it is the greatest memories of all centuries one can cherish. He concludes that if books disappear, surely history would disappear. He says, history will definitely disappear. What history will disappear now? It could be the history of book, it could be the history of printing, it could be the history of feeling the books, it could be the history of sensing the oneness. Just go back home or just take up a book and feel it. You hug it, you just hold it in your hand, and meanwhile on the other hand, you hold the laptop or a cell phone. Just feel the difference between the book and the electronic gadget. Now this history, if book disappears, history will definitely disappear. And not just that, along with this, even man would disappear. Even the mankind, not just the books, even the mankind would disappear. With this statement, Borges leaves the readers in dilemma of disappearance of mankind too. He says, he strongly believes, he's not just saying now, he strongly believes that as long as human being lives on this planet Earth, there should be book along with it. There should be book along with mankind. And that's how strongly he answers ALIFANO's questions. So with this, I wind up this session. Thank you everyone. In my next session, I will be teaching the chapter The Water, written by Chinua Achebe. Have a great day.